Okay, so we'll move to Jacqui. Jacqui is the coordinator of the Ecology Task Force at the Vatican COVID-19 Commission, working at the Vatican Dicastery for the Promotion of Integral Human Development. Jacqui also works as a Laudato Si consultant at the Australian Catholic University and is co-founder of the Laudato Si movement. Jacqui graduated from the University of Melbourne with a Bachelor of Education and Science in 1997, a postgraduate certificate in Leading Resilient Enterprises in 2014, and is currently undertaking a research doctorate at the University of Notre Dame in Australia. Jacqui was Director of Catholic Earth Care Australia for 10 years and has spent many years developing partnerships and ecological conversion initiatives to enable the Catholic Church to better care for God's creation through advocacy, education, research and collaboration. With a long history in environmental advocacy, Jacqui previously worked as the coordinator of the Northern Australia Environment Alliance and served as chair of Environs Kimberley. In 2006, Jacqui undertook training with Al Gore to become a climate change leader and presented Al Gore's slideshow throughout the Kimberley. Jacqui is a mother of 2 children, aged 10 and 14, and currently lives in Broome in northwestern Australia. And Jacqui will speak to us tonight on developments since Laudato Si, Season of Creation, Laudato Si Action Plan. Thanks, Jacqui.
Thanks so much, Philip. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this great event. I'm just going to share my screen now, and hopefully this technology works as anticipated. How's that?
Yep.
You can see it, I hope. For some reason, it's not moving. There we go.
That's good.
So thanks again. And yes, I think what Anne shared really provides such a strong spiritual foundation for me to speak in the terms that you've invited me to, which is about the actions that have been flowing on since its release in 2015. I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking on Yawuru country here, and the elders past, present and emerging people that I really want to say I respect and continue to work with in the best ways I can. My presentation is going to cover a few things, so I've just put this together to give you a sense of where I'm headed. The purpose of the session, a little bit about Laudato Si, and Anne, you'll see that I have selected very similar things to you. The season of creation, a little bit about Laudato Si week, and then Laudato Si being applied to a region of the world. Preparing the future, the Vatican COVID Commission and the links, the basis of Laudato Si that's shining through that. Assisi for parishes, that's a model I'd like to share, and the platform that's just been launched on Sunday. So the purpose and process, well, really, I think it's a short session, so it's about inviting you to listen, but perhaps you'd like to hold these questions as you're listening. What are our deepest aspirations? What's our highest collective potential for system-wide Laudato Si inspired communities? And if you can hold those questions while we go over a bit of a potted history of what's happened since Laudato Si, perhaps what might emerge are some new ways of learning and acting together. So one of the remarkable things about Laudato Si arriving in 2015, and some would say that it was late, but at least it arrived, was an understanding that's now firmly and centrally placed within Catholic social teaching, this call to see that the life of Jesus Christ, the transformative journey from death and to resurrection, was not just for the humans on this planet, but for the whole of creation. That has huge implications, And it means that looking after God's beautiful creation is no longer just for those who feel passionate, or those who've studied something about that, or those who enjoy pottering in the garden. It's actually for every single one of us. As much as I enjoy pottering in the garden. So one of the other key things that Anne mentioned is that many things have to change course. And at this time, as we face these incredible crises, the ecological, social, cultural, church, anthropological, spiritual, economic crises, it is we human beings above all who need to change.
Jacqui, it's Dennis. Sorry to cut in. Could you try to reduce the size of your slides a little bit? Because some of us are getting a truncated view.
That is an interesting question. I'm not sure how to do that at this point, Dennis.
Okay. I don't know how either. So we push on then.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Let me see if I can do anything to the scope or size, but it seems pretty set at this point. And whilst it's showing, it might be hard to change. Sorry about that. I've been invited to mention some of the key things that have happened since Laudato Si's launch. And one of them was that in 2015, we started to celebrate as the Catholic Church, joining our other ecumenical brothers and sisters, the season of creation. It was actually September 1st that was named to be the World Day of Prayer for God's creation, that Pope Francis joined with Patriarch Bartholomew, known as the Green Patriarch, to celebrate that day. And the Global Catholic Climate Movement celebrated this whole season. And each year over the last 6 years, it's become more and more integrated into the story of what it means for us in the Catholic Church. We've had great participation across the world, but we've also had increasing participation from Pope Francis with his messages, his videos, and his social media. We've also had each year Laudato Si week in the last few years, where significant changes have been brought about. So whilst we integrate this work always into our seasons of Advent, with an Advent Laudato Si inspired calendar, and the Lenten carbon reduction calendars, and all those ways of integrating it into what we already do, we also have these new moments in our liturgical calendar year. And Laudato Si week has been one of those special ones that didn't exist before. That means over a period of about 7, sometimes 8 days, we celebrate the anniversary of Laudato Si in very particular ways. And just in the last couple of years, we've been able to lift it up to a much higher level of consciousness. We celebrated, as you know, the Laudato Si special anniversary year, which was launched when the pandemic had started in May 2020 for that whole year. And the Laudato Si goals arrived in that May 2020 Laudato Si week. We launched the Laudato Si Action Platform as a concept with a very simple website in May 2021 in Laudato Si week. So keep an eye out for how you can celebrate Laudato Si week as a parish each year in that May period, as well as the season of creation. I also want to acknowledge something really significant that happened after Laudato Si's launch, which was its application to a region of the world known as the Amazon. This photograph was taken at the Sacré-Cœur Gardens in Trastevere, with Cardinal Rabat and I hanging prayer ribbons after we'd enjoyed a sustainable lunch meal together. And I think our prayers were pointing to the call, not only about what we hoped would come out of the Synod on the Amazon, but what it could mean as a model for us in Oceania. I want to say a few things about this, because I think this is like a case study for us, a test case, to see the insights and how they actually apply to our region of the world too. So it was the first time it was applied somewhere in the world. It brought about a whole new framework, a series of documents, but most importantly, it was the practice of a synodal process on the ground with local people, hearing their stories, listening to the cries of the earth and the poor, and trying to discern then what to do about it. And Pope Francis, of course, at the end of those years of process, where he'd been to visit the Amazon, and there's been a huge process in that region of the world, people were invited to Rome. And at that time, he listened to each and every participant without any request as to what they'd say. They had complete, free, open speech. Then about 4 months later, he provided us with this incredible document, Querida Amazonia, meaning beloved Amazon. And in that, he didn't cite tons of statistics and data, but he actually wrote in prose, much more like poetry and storytelling. He invites us to see that we're all on this synodal journey that requires further reflection, dialogue, and action. As we know, the Amazon is a hugely important part of the globe. It encompasses 9 countries and 33 million people, 2.5 million First Nations people, and it's a biodiversity hotspot because it absorbs so much carbon dioxide. Interestingly, Oceania is a similar story in terms of the lungs of the planet because it produces the ocean's 80% of the world's oxygen. In Querida Amazonia, Pope Francis invites us to share in 4 dreams. This is how Laudato sees applied. The dream for the people, the dream for the cultures of the earth, a dream for the ecology of the planet, and a dream for the church. In the social dream, he points out quite clearly the problems caused by the destruction of the environment. And as Anne Boyd said, the direct implication and consequence it has, causing poverty for people directly in the region and beyond. He firmly stands with and by the Indigenous people there, and that's the same everywhere all over the planet. He's inviting us to do the same. He points out that a common worldview is that the Amazon region is a giant empty space waiting to be exploited. Does that sound familiar to us in Australia when we learn about terra nullius and the ways that development keeps being proposed to the centre and northern Australia? There's this huge, enormous balance between the power of industry and business, together with governments at times, that tips the scales against our local people on the ground, particularly our Indigenous brothers and sisters. He also acknowledges, importantly, that churches did not always share their views. In the second dream, he talks about the cultural dream. This is the dream where Indigenous people are recognised for the true identities they hold, the languages they speak that are interconnected deeply to place. This has been and is still a struggle for so many people on the planet, and here in Australia, it's the same. We're being invited to see the ways of life that are deeply connected with the rivers, the forests, the creatures, the ecosystems. The ecological dream. This is by far the largest chapter in Querida Amazonia. But I'll just mention that, of course, he refers to Pope Benedict, who wrote about the inseparable care that's needed for nature and people. Pope Francis's work, of course, has deepened this considerably. And the dream for the church. Pope Francis invites us to see that the church is constantly reshaping her identity through this process of listening and dialogue with people and the planet, with the realities that we're in and the history of the places we inhabit. He invites us to see the gospel, the charisma, proclaiming the different ways a God who infinitely loves every person and every creature has revealed this love fully in Jesus Christ, crucified and risen in our lives today. He says what we need is a courageous openness to the novelty of the Spirit, who is always able to create something new. And we know that this is a huge part of the call of the Synod on Synodality. We're being called to walk, and the plenary council process at the moment. So really, it was a blessed time, and divine presence was found in the process. We see evidence of the damage being done to our earth. We see it in places like the Amazon. We see it in Australia. We don't have to look far to see the damage being done. The fires that we faced in the summer of 2019 and 20, the legacy we have there in terms of the restoration of habitats and ecosystems. This is the work we're being called to do. These are the jobs for all, the jobs for the future. And of course, when Querida Amazonia was launched, those were the timings of things taking place. In fact, the day after the Vatican published the exhortation, the Brazilian president demanded to know why Pope Francis had singled him out and his government and had not criticised Australia because of the enormous bushfires and loss of wildlife. That is, that the Brazilian president argued that Brazil was not the only country with difficulties in managing rich natural resources. So we see how politically complex our lives have become on this planet. I think the 7 key things that I take away from Querida Amazonia, which we can apply in our parish context, in our national context, and in our lives, might be these things. A greater sense of responsibility, to integrate Indigenous knowledge and wisdom with Western science and disciplines of every kind. That is, holding a perspective of integral ecology. That we should talk to and always refer to our principal dialogue partners, our Aboriginal brothers and sisters, before we undertake projects connected with the place that we're in. That we need to work towards robust legal frameworks to protect ecosystems and cultural places. That our view needs to always be about the common good. That helps us rise up out of this spiral of self-destruction and selfishness, the consumer mentality, to see that the common good is the path that helps us change our funding in our pension funds, to change the way our superannuation is geared, to change the way we choose to holiday or clothe ourselves, or the food that we're choosing to buy and where it comes from. The common good needs to guide all of our decision making. And of course, to appreciate the beauty of creation, respecting nature's rhythms and cycles, patterns and seasons, and being much more in tune with Sister Moon, Mother Earth. And lastly, I think it's essential, and this is what this night is about, and the future work that you're proposing as a group, is to strengthen education for everyone about the gift of creation. Another initiative I'd just like to mention, which I think is very significant in the life of the Church and Pope Francis applying Laudato Si, is when the pandemic hit, his response was to set up the Vatican COVID Commission. He invites us all to prepare the future, not to prepare for the future, but to prepare the future now. To do this with the realism of the gospel and the hope that it brings. And we need to generate and regenerate our society, especially our economic system and our ways of living, working, eating, and being. The COVID-19 pandemic is an opportunity to rebuild our relationships on that Trinitarian model in Laudato Si, with our Creator God, with one another, and with all of creation. It's also an opportunity to say that business as usual is no longer acceptable. and to change the course and pathways of how we go about our work, our business and our lives. The spiritual conversion being the guiding path. We've already mentioned, both Anne and I, the call of an integral perspective and an integral spirituality and way of life. The COVID Commission was set up with 4 key task forces: health, economy, ecology, and security. And the priorities that have been determined for its work in the last 18 months, with all of the input, the analysis, prioritising, the strategic planning and projects, is a focus on vaccines for all, food for all, and jobs for all. This is a path we're being called to walk and discern together, and it's a marathon. It's not a quick fix ever. Just want to mention a model for parishes that I developed over a couple of decades, beginning with my time at Catholic Earth Care, and that you can refer back to in the recording of this, to see the 6 green dimensions of what a parish can do when it focuses on taking a Laudato Si perspective, and perhaps over the course of a 7-year action plan. And now to the platform. The platform was launched on Sunday. This had been the culmination of many years of work. It's an invitation to everybody to respond to 7 key goals, including the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, noting that everything is interconnected, everything is interdependent, and we need a new ecological approach. We have the opportunity now to prepare a better tomorrow for all. Working together in this way, we can create the future we want, a more inclusive, fraternal, peaceful and sustainable world. There is hope, and we need to cooperate and do this together. So what is the platform? Well, it's available online. Anyone can go and have a look at it, but you do need to enrol so that you can see the guides, the resources, and the infrastructure of connecting with others to support this. It's being pitched particularly at 7 sectors of the church so that we walk our talk: parishes and dioceses, educational institutions, which is all schools and universities, seminaries, all educational institutions, hospitals and health facilities, the economy sector, which includes farms and businesses, organisations and Catholic agencies, religious orders who are leading the way, and families. So everyone can enrol in this. The 7 Laudato Si goals are very clearly on the platform as well. And the action suggestions for your sector, for your particular context that are offered are something for you to discern and choose with your family, with your parish, or whomever you're signing up with. There's more information about the platform at this web link, and of course there's a website. And one last mention, a wonderful woman I've been working with who did a PhD in ecological conversion in education has just launched this book, and I believe that she's with us tonight, Dr. Margaret Bannon, a Melbourne parishioner. She's shared this with me because some people are still coming to understand what climate change actually is all about, the implications and what we need to do. So I just thought I'd give that a plug if anybody's interested. And that concludes my input for the session tonight. Thank you, and in Yaru Galia.
Thank you very much, Jacqui. And look, thanks for that really interesting presentation, and so many good things happening, and finishing with the action platform. That's a challenge that we all are going to have to face and really respond to. Adrian, were there any questions raised? You might need to unmute, Adrian.
Thank you, Phil. Yes, I do have some questions around the season of creation and Laudato Si week. At more or less opposite ends of the year. Jacqui, do you have any particular activities that you feel may be particularly rewarding for parishes to undertake during these periods?
Yes, I think what needs to happen at the beginning of any sort of long-term planning process is a real sense of deep diving into what Laudato Si is saying, even if you've read it multiple times, to actually go through the process of dialogue as a group within a parish context. So I'd suggest setting up a steering group or a group like you've already got and dedicating time to actually have conversation on the topics, the themes, and perhaps even the chapters over a period of 6 weeks, so that a whole lot of things will come out of that conversation that builds a much greater sense of spirited community. And that's what's needed to sustain a 7-year journey. And of course, it's always ongoing work, this contemplative prayer space that we're called to hold. Being courageous enough to open ourselves to the Spirit. Yes, we can draw on prayers that are already there for us in Laudato Si and across our tradition, but we also need to hold those silent spaces together where we can actually let the new emerging Spirit speak about what to do next. And that, I think, is a different way of planning and acting. So that's what I would encourage.
Thank you very much, Jacqui. You mentioned the word listening in your introduction, and of course that's a word too that Anne touched on in relation to Miriam Rose in terms of deep listening, and you've come back to it now. It is very much, I think, given the profundity of the Laudato Si document and what the Pope is proposing, including in his encyclical or exhortation about the Amazon, that it certainly requires us to delve very deeply and to think and to speak and to listen very deeply to what the Spirit is saying to us. It can be pretty daunting to people to know where to start and whether it's worthwhile doing this, because this little thing that we're doing is so little. It doesn't appear to have much influence on the totality.
That's right. It can. It's very. It's like an invisible superpower that Pope Francis is inviting us to tap into. You know, we really haven't, I think, grown up as a church in the way of listening that he's inviting us to do now. This plenary council process that we're part of is enabling that for the participants and for people who've been tuning in. But I think this has got to spread much wider. It's indeed what we need to start with and what we need to maintain throughout the journey. And I think you're right in saying it can be daunting, because where do you start the listening and where do you stop? Well, I think we don't stop. It's a disposition. It's a way of being that he's calling us to hold, so that even when we are speaking, even when we're sure that there's this action we really want to take or that we should do as a parish, we're still open to what others may say to us, and we're still open to the messages of the Spirit coming through creation that might suggest that actually our action that we've got in mind isn't the first step. And I think that's the wisdom that can come from listening. So it is about practice. It doesn't happen overnight, as people say. It is a disposition of practice. And I think that's why we deliberately need to create the space for listening to happen in circles of people together, whether it's on Zoom or sitting in a circle in a room. This is a collective call, and that's the way to start it.
That's terrific. Thanks very much, Jacqui, and thanks, Adrian. And, you know, the only thing I could say, Jacqui, is please keep on doing the wonderful things you're doing. And look, it's inspiring for us that are just starting the journey. You know, you've clearly been there for quite some time, and you're doing great things. So a big thank you on behalf of all the audience. So please show our appreciation, although you won't be able to hear everybody. But thank you very much, Jacqui.
Thank you, Philip. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.